Stretching across the Detroit River, the Gordie Howe International Bridge was designed as a new artery for North American trade. It connects Detroit, Michigan to Windsor, Ontario, two manufacturing powerhouses at the heart of the region's economy. Historically, Windsor has been the auto hub for Canada, just like Detroit had been in the United States. But as the bridge nears opening, the landscape it was built for is starting to fray. Canada is building the Gordie Howe in part to take pressure off the aging Ambassador Bridge nearby, while strengthening vital supply chains with its top trading partner, the United States. I don't think they expected Donald Trump to come along and threaten that. Here's why Canada invested over $4 billion into the Gordie Howe Bridge, and what Trump's tariffs mean for its future. This stretch of the Detroit River is one of the busiest international crossings in North America. It's a crucial connection between Canada and the U.S., which traded over $760 billion in goods in 2024. Historically, around a quarter of that trade has moved via this artery, the privately owned Ambassador Bridge. The nearly century-old Ambassador Bridge has had its problems. Chief among them, its private ownership, which limits the control Canada and the U.S. have over it. Yet, it remains the primary crossing for trade in the region. Being so dependent on the Ambassador Bridge has left Canada in the past pretty vulnerable. A few years back there were some protests in Canada, and they actually blockaded the Ambassador Bridge. Within about a week, there was even a threat of auto plant shutdowns in the United States because of this blockade. So, enter the Gordie Howe, named after the Canadian hockey legend who played for the Detroit Red Wings. This bridge, with 6 lanes of traffic, will connect Detroit and Windsor by linking Interstate 75 in Michigan to Highway 401 in Ontario, creating a really seamless route. What it really does is connect the highway system between Canada and the United States, going all the way from Montreal to Florida. A 2021 study estimated that the bridge would cut 20 minutes off crossing time, saving truckers over $1.5 billion over 30 years. And back in 2012, Canada agreed to front the entire cost of construction, including the U.S. Customs Plaza, planning to recoup the cost through future toll revenue. Canada's footing the bill for the entire construction cost, mostly because they're more desperate to create this corridor than the U.S. was. There had been a slow bleed of the automotive industry south, and Canada was hoping that by strengthening the ties between the two cities and the two industrial heartlands, they would be able to sort of stave off some of that constant erosion. Once completed, the Gordie Howe Bridge is expected to increase capacity for commercial vehicles and speed up customs processing, benefiting both commuters and the surrounding industries, specifically the automotive industry. Last year, Canada exported over $27 billion in cars to the United States, and about $19 billion in car parts. Canada, the United States, and Mexico have realized that it's just more efficient for certain regions to specialize in specific parts of the supply chain. It's not uncommon for an auto part to cross both borders 6 or even 7 times before it finally ends up in a car assembly plant in Michigan. This Stellantis plant in Windsor, for example, builds cars that are then exported to the United States, but it actually relies on suppliers based in Detroit for many of its parts. And over in Michigan, major plants for Ford and GM have imported Canadian parts for their vehicles, while car plants in Ontario have used American parts in their assembly. What's more, the industry really depends on a just-in-time delivery model, where parts arrive exactly when they're needed. This helps minimize inventory held on site, cuts storage costs, and keeps operations nice and lean. The Gordie Howe was meant to support those tight timelines with more efficient delivery. Now, again, with Trump's tariffs and his explicit desire to move car factories and auto parts manufacturers out of Canada and Mexico, it seems like the Gordie Howe Bridge won't be able to solve that problem. This year, the U.S. announced a series of 25% tariffs, first on Canadian goods, then on car imports, and finally, on auto parts. In response, Canada hit back with its own 25% tariffs on certain U.S.-made vehicles. So, every time now that a company will ship a part across the border, they're going to have to pay a 25% tariff. Car makers have warned that Trump's tariffs are going to lead to shutdowns in the auto industry, and we've already, very early on, seen an indication that, in fact, that is happening. Earlier this month, Stellantis announced temporary production pauses at 2 plants due to the new U.S. tariffs, including its Windsor assembly plant. And decreased traffic means decreased revenue. In early planning stages, a 2010 report projected the bridge would generate $70.4 million in toll revenue in its first year, which was expected to be 2016 at the time. The Gordie Howe Bridge is slated to open in fall 2025, with the Canadian government spending $6.4 billion Canadian dollars on the project, the equivalent of $4.6 billion US dollars, and that's about 500 million more than its original projected cost. We don't really know how much trade between the two countries would be impacted, whether there's a tariff to last. If there is less traffic that goes across the Gordie Howe Bridge, it's almost inevitable that it's going to take a lot longer to pay back the $6 billion that Canada has taken on to build a bridge. You could end up in a scenario where Canada has footed the bill for a major bridge that ends up being a bit of a white elephant. The Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority declined to comment, but as tensions mount between the U.S. and Canada over tariffs, some experts warn the bridge may not deliver on its original promise, at least not as quickly as once hoped. This is an extremely fraught moment in time in Canada-U.S. relations. Gordie Howe Bridge was meant to be, in some ways, a celebration of the close ties between the countries. Those ties are frayed. The Gordie Howe Bridge threatens now to become a symbol of an era that once was and may never be again.